The arrival. The vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretched out beneath Ambassador Zora's ship, an endless blue canvas dotted with the occasional emerald jewel of an island. From her vantage point high in Earth's atmosphere, Zora marveled at the beauty of this world that her people had observed for centuries. As the lead diplomat of the Galactic Confederation, she had seen countless planets, but Earth held a special fascination. Its inhabitants, though technologically primitive by Confederation standards, possessed a remarkable spirit of resilience and creativity. Zora's reverie was abruptly shattered by a series of alarms blaring through the ship's cockpit. Red warning lights flashed across her control panel as the ship began to shudder violently. "Computer, status report," Zora commanded, her four-fingered hands dancing across the holographic interface. "Ambassador," the AI responded in its calm, melodic voice, "we've sustained critical damage to our primary propulsion system and shield generators. Origin of attack unknown. Crash landing imminent." Panic gripped Zora as she processed this information. An attack here, in the protected space of a pre-contact world. It was unprecedented, a gross violation of Confederation law. But there was no time to ponder the implications. Her ship was plummeting toward the planet's surface at an alarming rate. "Computer, find me the nearest landmass for emergency landing," Zora ordered, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Calculating nearest suitable landing zone," came the reply. "An uninhabited island approximately 200 kilometers from our current position. Adjusting course now." The ship lurched as it changed direction, skimming the ocean's surface. Zora could see a small speck of land growing larger on the horizon. She gritted her teeth, using all her piloting skills to keep the damaged craft airborne for just a few more precious moments. With a deepening roar, the ship plowed into the sandy beach of the island, carving a deep furrow as it slid to a stop at the edge of a dense jungle. The impact slammed Zora against her restraints, momentarily knocking the wind out of her as dust settled around her. "Assessing damage." "Computer, damage assessment," she wheezed, regaining her breath. "Hull integrity at 62%. Life support systems functional. Communication array offline. Emergency beacon active but operating at reduced power due to damage." Zora unstrapped herself and stood on shaky legs. She needed to get out of the ship in case of a fuel leak or fire. Grabbing an emergency survival pack, she made her way to the airlock and cycled it open. The humid air of Earth hit her like a wall as she stepped out onto this alien world. Her pale blue skin, evolved for the cooler climate of her home world, immediately began to glisten with moisture. She took a deep breath, analyzing the air. It was breathable, though the high oxygen content made her feel slightly lightheaded. Zora's large, multifaceted eyes scanned the beach and dense vegetation beyond. The island seemed deserted, but she couldn't be sure. Her training kicked in as she began to catalog her priorities. Find shelter. Secure a water source. Attempt repairs on the communication array. Avoid contact with indigenous populations at all costs. As she pondered her next move, a movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention. She whirled around, hand instinctively reaching for the small defensive weapon at her side. First encounter. A figure emerged from the tree line, and Zora found herself face to face with one of Earth's natives, a human male. He was tall and lean with sun-bronzed skin and a scraggly beard. Clad in tattered clothing that had clearly seen better days, he clutched a crude spear fashioned from sharpened wood. His eyes, a startling shade of green, were wide with a mixture of fear and wonder as he beheld this alien before him. For a long moment, neither moved. Zora's mind raced. This was exactly what she had been trained to avoid. Direct contact with a pre-space flight civilization could have dire consequences that might alter their natural course of development. But in her current predicament, she realized she might not have a choice. The human was the first to break the silence. He spoke words that were unintelligible to Zora, but conveyed caution and questioning through his tone. He gestured toward her ship and then back to herself. Zara slowly raised her hands, palms out, in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I mean you no harm," she said softly, knowing he wouldn't understand, but hoping her tone would convey her intentions. The human tilted his head in consideration before mimicking her gesture by lowering his spear. He spoke again, this time pointing to himself and uttering a single word repeatedly. "Jack," he said while thumping his chest. Zara realized he was telling her his name. She pointed to herself and replied simply, "Zara." A smile broke across Jack's face, transforming his features from weary to almost boyishly excited. He gestured for her to follow him, pointing toward the jungle. Zara hesitated. Following this human went against every protocol she had been taught. But as she glanced back at her ruined ship, her only means of contacting home, she knew options were limited. With silent apologies to her superiors back home echoing in her mind, she nodded and fell into step behind Jack as they tread through dense foliage. A glimpse into survival. After about 20 minutes of walking through thick underbrush, they emerged into a small clearing that took Zara's breath away. A crude yet ingenious shelter stood in its center, constructed from salvaged pieces that appeared to be parts from boats or planes long lost at sea. Various handmade tools and weapons were scattered about like trophies from survival struggles past. To one side grew a small garden filled with native plants arranged in neat rows, a testament to Jack's resourcefulness amid isolation. Jack gestured proudly toward his camp before pointing to a small stream that ran along its edge, inviting Zara to refresh herself after their trek through humidity-laden air. As Zara cautiously approached the stream, marveling at Jack's survival skills, a distant rumble caught her attention. She looked up. Her extra-sensitive hearing picked up sounds that Jack had yet to notice. It was something familiar yet terrifying. Spacecraft entering Earth's atmosphere. Panic gripped Zara as she realized what this meant. Those ships weren't Confederation vessels coming to rescue her. No, they had to be from those who shot her down in the first place. They were coming back, coming to finish what they started. Zara turned back toward Jack, who was now looking at her with concern. He finally heard it too, the approaching ships. And in that moment, the stakes had risen dramatically for both alien queen and human survivor alike as they faced an uncertain future together on this isolated island amidst impending danger looming overhead. A moment of understanding. As the distant rumble of spacecraft grew louder, Zara felt a wave of urgency wash over her. She turned to Jack, who was still looking at her with concern, his green eyes wide and alert. The tension in the air was palpable. They were both aware that danger was imminent. "Jack," Zara said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "We need to find shelter. There's no time to waste." Jack nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation without needing a translation. He grabbed his spear and motioned for Zara to follow him deeper into the jungle. They moved quickly, weaving through thick foliage that rustled with every step. Zara's heart raced, not just from fear, but also from the realization that she was relying on this human for her survival. The shelter. After a few minutes of hurried movement, they arrived at a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. The sound of rushing water masked their presence, providing a natural cover. Jack gestured for Zara to enter first, and she did so cautiously, scanning the dark interior for any signs of danger. Inside, the cave was surprisingly spacious and dry. Jack began to gather some fallen branches and leaves, creating a makeshift barrier at the entrance to obscure their hiding place. Zara watched him work, impressed by his resourcefulness. She realized that despite their differences, they shared a common goal: survival. "Thank you," she said softly as he finished fortifying their shelter. Jack looked at her, puzzled but pleased by her gratitude. He pointed to himself, and then to her, making a gesture that indicated they were now allies. Communication barrier. Zara knew that effective communication would be crucial if they were to survive together. She rummaged through her survival pack and pulled out a small holographic device, a universal translator she had hoped never to use, but now deemed necessary. "Let's try this," she said, activating the device. A soft blue light enveloped them as it calibrated to their languages. Jack watched in fascination as the device hummed to life. "What is that?" he asked in simple English, his voice tinged with curiosity. "It will help us understand each other," Zara replied, relieved that they could finally communicate more effectively. Jack nodded, his expression turning serious again as he glanced toward the cave entrance. "They come," he said, pointing outside. The threat revealed. Zara strained her ears and heard it too, the unmistakable sound of engines roaring overhead. She peered out from behind their makeshift barrier and saw shadowy figures moving above in sleek ships that glinted ominously against the sky. "They're looking for me," she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "I need to contact my people." Jack frowned but didn't respond immediately. He seemed deep in thought before finally pointing toward the stream they had passed earlier. "Water," he said simply, then mimicked a signal for sending a message, an action that indicated he understood her need for communication. Zara felt a surge of hope. Perhaps this human could help her after all. "Yes, if we can get to my ship." "No," Jack interrupted firmly, shaking his head. "Too dangerous." Zara studied him closely. His determination was evident. She realized he was right. Returning to the crash site would likely expose them both to the hostile ships circling above. "Then we need another plan," she said decisively. "What do you suggest?" "Learning from each other." Jack took a moment before responding. He seemed to be weighing his thoughts carefully. Finally, he pointed toward the garden area near his shelter and then mimicked planting seeds in the ground. "You want me to help you grow food?" Zara asked, trying to understand his intent. He nodded enthusiastically, and then pointed back toward the cave entrance again, as if indicating they needed more supplies for their survival plan. Zara considered this new direction. It made sense for them to establish a sustainable source of food while they waited for an opportunity to escape or signal for help. "All right," she agreed with a smile. "Let's gather what we can." Together, they ventured out cautiously into the jungle once more, gathering edible plants and fruits while avoiding any unnecessary noise that might attract attention from above. The bond strengthens. As they worked side by side, Zara learned more about Jack's life on Earth, his struggles and triumphs as he had survived alone on this island for what seemed like months or years. He showed her how to identify various plants and explained which ones were safe to eat through gestures and simple words. In return, Zara shared snippets of her own life back home, her role as an ambassador and her dreams for peaceful relations between species across galaxies. Though Jack couldn't grasp every detail due to language barriers, he listened intently, fascinated by tales of distant worlds filled with colors and creatures beyond imagination. Their bond began to deepen. What started as mere necessity evolved into mutual respect and friendship, a connection neither had anticipated but both desperately needed in this moment of crisis. A new plan. As dusk fell over the island and shadows danced around them, Zara felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude toward Jack for his companionship during such perilous times. They returned to their shelter with their gathered supplies and prepared a simple meal with what they had found. An odd combination of earth fruits alongside some nutrient packs from Zara's survival gear. As they ate together by the flickering light of a small fire Jack had managed to start using flint stones, Zara felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced since leaving her home planet. "Tomorrow," Zara said after swallowing a mouthful of food, "we will work together on creating a signal device using parts from my ship." Jack nodded enthusiastically, but then pointed upward again toward where the ships had flown earlier. His expression turned serious once more. "Yes," Zara agreed somberly. "We must remain vigilant." Facing tomorrow with their meal finished and plans set for the next day, they settled into an uneasy silence punctuated only by the sounds of nature surrounding them, the rustling leaves and distant calls of wildlife, reminding them both that life continued despite their dire circumstances. As darkness enveloped the island like a thick blanket, Zara found herself reflecting on how far she had come since crashing on this planet. How an alien queen had found unexpected heroism in an unlikely human ally named Jack. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would fight against not just external threats, but also against their own fears and uncertainties about what tomorrow might bring. The threat approaches. A sense of urgency, the distant sound of engines roared like thunder, echoing ominously through the jungle. Zara's heart raced as she and Jack crouched in their makeshift shelter, the reality of their situation sinking in. The ships circling above were not there for a friendly visit. They were the same hostile forces that had shot her down, and they were coming back to finish what they had started. "Jack," Zara whispered urgently, her multifaceted eyes scanning the cave entrance. "We need to prepare for an attack." Jack nodded, his expression serious. He pointed toward the cave's entrance, and then mimicked a defensive stance, indicating that they needed to be ready for anything. Zara appreciated his instinct. He understood the gravity of their predicament. "Planning their defense, let's gather whatever we can find," Zara suggested, her mind racing with strategies. "We need to create barriers and traps around the entrance to slow them down if they come here." Jack quickly agreed and began collecting branches and stones from around the cave, working with a speed that surprised Zara. She felt a surge of admiration for this human who had survived alone on this island. Together, they worked in silence, their movements synchronized as they built up defenses. As they fortified their hiding place, Zara couldn't help but feel a growing bond with Jack. They were two beings from vastly different worlds, united by a common goal: survival. The sound of danger just as they finished setting up their defenses, a loud crash echoed through the trees outside. Zara's heart skipped a beat as she exchanged a worried glance with Jack. They both knew that the time for preparation was over. Danger was now at their doorstep. Zara peered cautiously out from behind their barrier, her alien senses heightened. She could see shadows flitting between the trees, figures moving with purpose and intent. The hostile ships had landed nearby. "Stay low," she instructed Jack, who nodded in understanding. Zara's mind raced with thoughts of how to communicate with her people back home. If only she could repair her communication array. But first, they needed to survive this encounter. The hostile forces, the figures emerging from the jungle, were unlike anything Zara had encountered before. Clad in dark armor and equipped with advanced weaponry, they moved with an unsettling precision that sent chills down her spine. These were not mere soldiers. They were elite operatives sent to eliminate her. "Zara," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. "What do we do?" "We wait," she replied firmly. "We observe." They watched as the hostile forces fanned out around the area, searching for any signs of life. Zara's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that they were looking for her specifically. A moment of insight as the soldiers moved closer to their shelter. Zora's mind raced with ideas. She remembered stories from her training about guerrilla tactics used by resistance fighters on other planets. Perhaps she could use similar techniques here. "Jack," she said quietly, "if we can lure them away from our shelter, we might have a chance to escape or signal for help." Jack nodded thoughtfully and pointed at some nearby foliage that could be used to create distractions. He then gestured toward the stream behind them. "Water," he said simply. Zara understood immediately. If they could create noise near the stream, it might draw attention away from their hiding place. "Yes, let's do it." Creating distractions, they worked quickly but quietly, moving toward the stream while keeping an eye on the soldiers patrolling nearby. Jack gathered rocks and began tossing them into the water, creating splashes that echoed through the jungle. Zora joined him, using her advanced hearing to gauge how far away the soldiers were. She could hear their footsteps crunching on leaves and twigs as they drew closer. "Now," Zora whispered urgently as she threw another rock into the water. The sound rippled through the air like a beacon, drawing the attention of one of the soldiers who turned sharply toward the noise. "Over there," he shouted to his companions. "The chase begins without hesitation." Several soldiers sprinted toward the stream, leaving only two behind to guard their original position. Zara felt a rush of adrenaline. Their plan was working. Let's go. She urged Jack as they slipped out of their hiding place and made a dash for deeper cover in the jungle. They moved swiftly through the underbrush, careful not to make any noise that would alert those left behind. As they ran, Zara felt an exhilaration she hadn't experienced since her arrival on Earth, a sense of freedom mixed with fear. A new hideout. After several minutes of running through dense foliage, they found another small clearing surrounded by thick trees, a perfect spot to regroup and catch their breath. "We need to find a way to signal for help," Zara said breathlessly as she leaned against a tree trunk for support. Jack nodded but looked concerned. He pointed back toward where they had come from and mimicked a gesture indicating danger was still present. "Yes," Zara agreed, "but we can't stay here forever." She rummaged through her survival pack again and pulled out some emergency supplies, flares and a small beacon designed for long-distance communication. "If I can get this working again," she said excitedly, "we might be able to send a distress signal." Working together, Jack watched intently as Zara began inspecting her equipment under dim light filtering through leaves above them. He seemed eager to help but didn't know how he could contribute. "Can you help me gather materials?" Zara asked him, pointing at some fallen branches and leaves nearby that could serve as makeshift tools or insulation for her equipment. With determination in his eyes, Jack set off to collect what he could find while Zara focused on repairing her beacon system. She worked quickly yet carefully. Every second counted if they wanted any chance of survival against impending threats. An unexpected discovery. As Jack returned with more supplies than she expected, his resourcefulness shining through, Zara felt an unexpected warmth loom within her chest again. This partnership was becoming more than just necessity. It was evolving into something deeper. Suddenly, while working together in silence punctuated only by rustling leaves and distant animal calls around them, Zara heard something strange coming from above, a low hum resonating through trees overhead. "What is that?" Jack asked cautiously as he looked up toward where sound originated from, a sight that made both their hearts race anew. A glimmer of hope. Zara squinted against fading light filtering through branches above them until finally spotting what appeared like another ship hovering just beyond treetops. It was sleek yet different than those hostile vessels. This one radiated hope. "It's my people," she exclaimed joyfully before quickly realizing something crucial. They couldn't just wave at it. "We need to signal them," she urged Jack urgently while scrambling back toward equipment laid out earlier, her fingers flying across controls frantically trying to make sense amidst chaos surrounding them. Jack watched intently as she worked tirelessly, his faith unwavering despite uncertainty looming over both their heads like dark clouds threatening rain at any moment. Together, against all odds, they would find a way forward, but first, they had to survive this night.